From halving inflation to cutting waiting lists, this week we made real progress that will help families up and down the country. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak unable to contain his excitement on Twitter this week. Here's what's happened. We took the next step in our plan to cut waiting lists by creating 900 new beds. NHS waiting lists have just hit a new record high. A staggering 7.6 million people were waiting to start routine hospital treatment at the end of June. That's up from 7.5 million in May. That figure's the highest number since comparable records began in August 2007. And imagine the shock for the Prime Minister when someone tells him the Conservative government has actually cut 12,000 NHS beds since 2010. 12,000. So spinning 900 new beds as some kind of win for the public is just completely insane. It's even worse than cutting 21,000 police officers and then expecting us all to be grateful when they recruit 20,000 back. And guess who did that? This week, inflation fell significantly to 6.8%. This good news shows our plan is working. Well, inflation may be falling, but even Larry the Cat knows that's because of the decline in the price of commodities like gas and the increase in interest rates. Again, imagine the shock for the Prime Minister when he finds out he has absolutely no control over either of them. Inflation in July was almost 7% and food price inflation was almost 13%. 1 million adults in the UK can't even afford to eat every day. That's not a cause for celebration, it's a national embarrassment. So what exactly is the Prime Minister's plan which he says is helping to bring down inflation? Again, he couldn't contain his excitement on Twitter. Taking tough decisions to give our brilliant public sector workers a fair pay deal without increasing inflation. 2022 was the worst year for real wage growth in nearly half a century. Average real wages in the UK will actually be lower in 2026 than they were in 2008. So on what planet can it be said wage rises for public sector workers are causing high inflation? Tackling the causes of inflation that drive up prices. Backing oil and gas in the North Sea to secure our energy supply. Well, the Prime Minister will fall off his chair when he watches this.
And Rishi Sunak says rather than importing it from hostile states and playing into Vladimir Putin's hands, he wants more gas to come from Britain and claims this will bring down bills. Now, the UK is a net importer of gas, but even before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia provided just 4% of our gas in the UK. Most of our gas imports come from not very hostile Norway.
Household energy costs soared not because of Russian imports, but because the price we pay for gas is set by traders on the global market, and that price increased after Russia invaded Ukraine.
So would extracting more gas from the North Sea deliver Rishi Sunak's promise today of British energy from Britain at a cheaper cost? Well, he can't force companies that extract North Sea gas to sell it in the UK, nor at a discounted price. And many North Sea projects are backed by multinational companies from countries including Norway, the United Arab Emirates, and China. And the gas they extract is traded internationally at international prices. And right now, there's nothing stopping them exporting this gas overseas from the UK. So while Rishi Sunak argues that extracting more oil and gas will increase homegrown supplies and bring down prices, that's clearly in dispute. And we asked the government to clarify or provide the data to back up these claims. They did not. Instead, they referred us to the Prime Minister's comments today in Aberdeen, which of course repeat those very claims.
It gets better.
Let's look at what happens, first of all, to all that oil being pumped out of the North Sea. How much of it stays here in the UK? Well, about 20% of North Sea oil is for domestic UK consumption. Most of it, 80%, is exported worldwide into the international market. And that's why the government's critics say we're already extracting more oil than we need and selling it overseas, and they argue that's no good for the planet.
The Prime Minister continued with this gem: a huge new childcare package to help parents back into work. That doesn't even kick in until 2024 and 2025, keeping people in work with a £1 billion tax cut on pension contributions. It's a policy which helps the wealthiest 1%. How is that going to help bring down inflation? And while we're on this subject, how is removing the cap on bankers' bonuses going to help? Never underestimate just how thick this government thinks we all are. We're making the UK the best place to invest and grow. We've joined the CPTPP, the biggest trade deal since Brexit. Well, if that's the biggest trade deal since Brexit, heaven help us, because on the government's own estimates of the potential boost to the UK economy from CPTPP membership, Britain's GDP will see an increase of just £1.8 billion over the next decade. Just £1.8 billion over a decade. To put that into context,
the Centre for Economic Reform claims the government has lost out on £40 billion in taxes because of the damage done to the country's output by leaving the European Union.
On the government's own figures on this trade deal, in a decade we are likely to see an increase in our wealth of just 0.08%. On the other side of the balance sheet, the loss of GDP due to Brexit and exiting the EU single market is put conservatively by the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility at a staggering 4% of GDP by 2030. That's at least 50 times greater. So Sunak's plan, if you can call it a plan, is to stick his head in the sand and pretend Brexit isn't inflicting untold economic damage on the country. Ignore the International Monetary Fund, which says it was rising corporate profits which were the largest contributor to Europe's inflation over the past 2 years, as companies increased prices by more than the spike in costs of imported energy, and impose another round of crappy real terms pay cuts on public sector workers using justifications rubbished by most expert economists.